Hi, welcome back to Big Word Bible Studies. I am Tanya Dennis. Today we are talking about 2 Chronicles beginning in chapter 17. We're going 17 through chapter 20. This is the reign of King Jehoshaphat in the southern kingdom of Judah. Our study this season has actually been on the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings, however, parallels several of the sections of 2 Chronicles. At the beginning of our study and throughout this, I've kind of reminded you, but in case you forgot, the books of Kings tell the accounts of the kings of Judah, which is the southern kingdom, and Israel, the northern kingdom, after the division after King Solomon. Okay, so there's King David, there's King Solomon, and then the nation divides into the northern and the southern kingdom. So Kings covers both of those kingdoms. Chronicles, however, only covers the southern kingdom, which is the kingdom of Judah. So while we finished 1 Kings, we finished all the chapters of that last time in our last video. Today we're looking in Chronicles to kind of add another dimension to the story there at the end. Kings does cover, it leans heavily onto the northern kingdom and the stories of the kings of Israel, probably because they're far more dramatic. There are a lot of ups and downs there and a lot of, well, it's kind of soap opera-ish. So there's, we find a lot of drama in the northern kingdom, whereas the southern kingdom is a little more steady. You know, they've got their ups and downs a little bit, but they're a little more steady. So there's not as much to tell about them. However, Chronicles does a good job of coming in, giving us another dimension, another perspective of what actually was happening in the southern kingdom while the northern kingdom was, you know, going a little crazy and chasing all their gods and doing all their battles and assassinating kings and, you know, all of that, you know, dramatic stuff. So, okay, let's get into 2 Chronicles. In chapter 17, we had our discussion last night, and again, while we finished 1 Kings last time, this time we were able to contrast the horrible, horrible King Ahab and his wife Jezebel and all of the evil things that they were doing in the northern kingdom that perfectly contradicted God's laws. Here we have a perspective of the southern king, King Jehoshaphat, who was the exact opposite. So in 2 Chronicles chapter 17, I want to start reading in verse 3. It says, "And the Lord was with Jehoshaphat because he followed the example of his father David's earlier days and did not seek the Baals, but sought the God of his father, followed his commandments, and did not act as Israel did. So the Lord established the kingdom in his control." Now we see throughout the Old Testament this very clear cause and effect throughout the Old Testament, that if you seek the Lord, if you follow his laws, if you seek to honor him by establishing his statutes in your life, he will establish you. He will protect you and bless you and all of these different things. This is what happens when you seek the Lord, you will be blessed. So this is what we see in Jehoshaphat. So not only did he follow in the steps of his, you know, ancestor David, he followed God's laws, but he also made sure that those in his kingdom did the same. Down in verse 9, we see, well, in verse 7, it talks about all of his officials. Verses 7 and 8, it talks about his officials. In verse 9, it says, "And they taught in Judah, having the book of the law of the Lord with them. And they went throughout all the cities of Judah and taught among the people." In verse 10, "Now the dread of the Lord was on all the kingdoms of the lands which were around Judah, so that they did not make war against Jehoshaphat. The Philistines brought tribute, the Arabians brought tribute, and Jehoshaphat grew greater and greater." So if you look through this chapter and look more specifically at these verses, you'll see exactly what the tributes were and what the gifts were, and how all of these nations grew to fear God because Jehoshaphat honored him. They looked at the people of Judah and they saw that their God was great. And that is what we desire for ourselves, isn't it? We want people to look at us and not say, "Oh, wow, you know, she's a really great Bible teacher. Oh, wow, she's got her whole, you know, house together. And wow, he really, you know, has a beautiful wife and his kids are great and he's got a great career." We want people to look at us and not see us for our successes, but to look at us and say, "Wow, I want to know the God that that person serves. I want to know the God who helps this person in times of trial, who is the reason why they live the way that they live. I want to know that God." And that's what happened here with Jehoshaphat. All the nations around them turned and said, "Wow, look at their God. Let's give them honor so that their God might honor us in return." Now, these verses went on and on in explaining this cause and effect where's my vocabulary? This cause and effect situation here, reality. After verse 12, it goes on to talk about, I just want to point out very quickly that it repeats the phrase mighty men of valor 4 times in, I believe it's only 3 verses here. Mighty men of valor, and it gives all of the numbers of these mighty men of valor. You might remember that this is the same terminology used to describe Gideon back in Judges. Now, when chapter 18 starts, we learn something a little different about Jehoshaphat. While he was seeking God, he also made a marriage alliance with King Ahab. Last time we got together, I don't remember if I discussed this in the video specifically, but if you were reading through the chapters that we discussed last time, and if you were here in our in-home group, you know, we had a little bit of conflict with, okay, Ahab and Jehoshaphat made this alliance, and, you know, Ahab tells Jehoshaphat to do this and do that, and Jehoshaphat just does it. So why is he putting himself out there for this other king? It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like they go into battle and Ahab says, okay, I'm going to wear common clothes, but you dress like the king so everyone will know you're the king, which basically is putting a giant target on his back. So the question is, why did Jehoshaphat just kind of do whatever Ahab told him to do, even though it seemed unwise? And if Jehoshaphat was, you know, seeking God and following in all of his ways, and Ahab clearly was not, how did they have this alliance? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense until you get to 2 Chronicles 18, verse 1. It tells us that Jehoshaphat allied with Ahab by marriage. Most likely he married his daughter. So that explains a lot of that dynamic. It explains why Jehoshaphat went ahead and did some of these things. It also explains why, when they called in the prophets to figure out whether or not they should go to war against this other nation, why they went back and forth about it. And Micaiah was not called initially. It was Ahab who was like, well, I'm only calling the people who like me, and Micaiah doesn't like me, and so I'm not calling him. In chapter 18, verse 6, Jehoshaphat actually questioned Ahab and all of these prophets that were coming up to him, and it said, is there not yet a prophet of the Lord here that we may inquire of him? They already had all of these prophets come in, but they were all saying something that Jehoshaphat knew, because he was walking with the Lord, because he was following God's laws. He knew when these prophets spoke that they were not speaking on behalf of the Lord, that they were speaking untruths. And so he ended up calling up and saying, where's another one? Ahab called up Micaiah, you know, you guys remember this whole story, and you can read through chapter 18 here, you can read through the other chapters at the end of 1 Kings to get the whole story, but this just explains a little bit of that dynamic there that we questioned when we got together last time. So that is that. I want to focus now on chapter 20, Jehoshaphat's prayer. Just another bit of encouragement for you, for me. Some of these are universal truths. Yes, it is written specifically for Jehoshaphat and for his people at that time, but I just found so much encouragement in his words here. Chapter 20, verse 5, Jehoshaphat, he was in the temple and before the court, and this is what he said, O Lord, the God of our fathers, are you not God in the heavens? And are you not ruler over all the kingdoms of the nations? Power and might are in your hands so that no one can stand against you. That's our God. How powerful is that? He then goes on in his prayer. Let's see, I'm going to skip around a little bit, so I'll put the references up on the screen here so that you can follow along. And still in chapter 20, in verse 15, he says, do not fear or be dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. In verse 17, you need not fight in this battle. Station yourselves, stand, and see the salvation of the Lord on your behalf. God is instructing them to be firm, be strong. It reminds me of Joshua 1:19. Be strong in the Lord. I'm sorry, I'm misquoting. Joshua 1:9 says, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. It's the same refrain that we see here. Remember that the battle is God's and not yours. Now, this does not mean that we should be apathetic or that we should be still and just wait for things to happen. We need to move when God says to move. But we need to remember that the results are in the hands of God. That it's not our job to win. It's our job to do what we've been told to do. And God will have success by the definition by his definition, not ours. Success isn't always what we think it ought to be. It is what God thinks it ought to be. And we need to simply align ourselves with God, follow in his statutes, and the rest, he'll take care of the rest. We don't need to worry about that as long as we are following him. Still in chapter 20, verse 20, it says, put your trust in the Lord your God and you will be established. Put your trust in his prophets and succeed. This is exactly what I was just saying. Success is not defined by our understanding of the circumstances or our understanding of success, but it is defined by God and his laws. What he determines to be success, that will be our success. So, that's about all I have for you. I'm trying to think if there was anything else we talked about last night that might be oh, yes, okay. Back to the prophets in chapter 18. Last time we talked, when we were covering 1 Kings chapter, I believe it was chapter 20, 22, that whole section, we were confused because there was a spirit of lying. And why would the spirit of lying come in? Now, in the video, I explained to you that God is God and we can't always know all the answers. We do get a little bit more picture here. When we put these two passages together, it gives us a fuller vision, a more 3D understanding of this time in history. So in chapter 18, it talks about all of these things, but it also gives us insight into what happened before that lying spirit came in. And we likened this to Job. Now, there's a little vignette here that talks about when God is sitting there, he's up in the heavens and he says, who is going to incite Ahab to do this thing? And the different spirits were coming around and the one said, oh, I'll do it. So there was a volunteer and the volunteer comes up, this spirit, and says, I'm going to go and put a lying, voice. I will be a lying voice to Ahab. And this is what I'm going to tell the prophets to tell him so that he will go and, do these things. And the Lord allowed that. Now, this again, when you parallel this with the story of Job, where Satan came to God and said, God said, have you considered my servant Job? And Satan gave all these excuses. Well, this is why he honors you, and this is why he's doing this. And God allowed Satan to have reign over Job, but only to a certain extent. This is what happened here. God sets the parameters to say, all right, these are the walls. You can work within this section and do whatever you want to do within this section, but you can't go outside of these boundaries. God is sovereign, and he still is in control of the situation. That does not mean he instigates the situation. That does not mean that he was the lying spirit or that he told the lying spirit to go. He allowed the lying spirit to go. And it's an important distinction because God cannot contradict himself. He cannot lie because he is God. He is fully righteous, and he cannot do something that contradicts his character or his nature. However, he does allow certain things to happen so that we may be tested and we may exercise our free will and eventually, hopefully, choose him instead of choosing the alternative. Okay, I think that's all I have for you today. I do want to encourage you to seek after God, to trust in him, and to acknowledge that there is none like him. I know it's something I've repeated several times over this. If we could sum up our entire study this season into a few key points, it is that God is God and we are not. Nothing compares to him. There is none like him. And he pursues us relentlessly. And there are consequences when we do not seek him in return. But his faithfulness knows no bounds. So be encouraged. We are at the end of our study here, so this is going to be the last section for this season. Hopefully we can return and dive into 2 Kings in the fall, probably in September. So stay tuned. If you're not yet subscribed to Big Word, please do. You can go on my website, TanyaDennisBooks.com, and you can subscribe to the email updates. You can also go back and check out some older studies that we've done. We've gone through Judges, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and now 1 Kings. We also have a couple other studies there there that go into specific topics like idolatry. That study is called No Other Gods and features a book by Kelly Minter. So yeah, check out the website, see what else is there. Give me some feedback. I want to know through the comments, through the blog, what you're thinking and what you're doing. And yeah, I hope to see you soon. Let me know if there's something else that you want to study in the future. I'd love to hear about it, and we'll see what we can do. Okay, thanks a bunch. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.